Video games are a medium that can connect players with their protagonists with an intimacy that no other storytelling medium can match. The best written books can give you an insight into a character's deepest flaws and motivations. Movies can emote pain and conflict with an intensity unrivaled anywhere else. Comic books and graphic novels, they can combine these two advantages with the intense visual storytelling accompanying deep personal dramas. Even television sitcoms, long-running dramas, well, they can use their extended runtime to slowly build up deep emotional connections that the audience or consumer has. They build a familiarity with the protagonists. So each of the mediums has their own strengths, but none of them let you actually take charge and control the actions of your character like a video game will enable you to do. A well-produced game lets you really get inside the head of your leads directly. And over the last 30 years, they have got so good at doing this. Complex plots are almost par for the course now for immersive, sandbox experiences that most AAA games are slowly trending towards. However, I can locate some significant milestones along the way, and one of them has got to be the release of Soul Reaver, Legacy of Kain. This is a game that glories in the single greatest strength, the method of storytelling within video games that they can offer the immersive experience because it is making the most out of its two main protagonists. Throughout Soul Reaver, you play entirely exclusively as Raziel, the titular Soul Reaver, the empty husk of a disgraced and decimated vampire who has degraded even further to become this shambling, half-existing wraith. Following a short but phenomenally well-written and voiced opening monologue, Raziel is resurrected into this abomination and then tasked with taking revenge on the vampire clans who turned on him. This is a game about fratricide, about a wronged man seeking redemption via the most bloodthirsty method possible. That all the characters are inhuman anyway, that they are blood-sucking monsters from beyond the grave, provides an epical counterbalance to the inherent violence in Raziel's task. He was a vampire, but now he's something worse, a hunter who preys on the monsters that we, as human consumers, would fear ourselves. Playing as Raziel is an empowering experience. Not only does he boast superhuman strength, have elegant and well-written dialogue from the game director Amy Hennig, Richard LeMarchand and Jim Curry, but he takes on the role of an apex predator in a world almost exclusively populated with monstrous abominations. But the game's villain is Kain, whom the series Legacy of Kain names itself after. Soul Reaver, despite being both the start of a new sub-franchise and the jumping-on point for most players, is actually the second game of the series. It's only an indirect sequel to the original Legacy of Kain game, Blood Omen, where you played as the main vampire lord himself. Even now, decades later, I still maintain there may not be any video game villain as well defined as Kain. He's just as well written as Raziel, and the voice actor Simon Templeman, well, he delights in chewing the scenery with his voice. Not only is this a tyrannical ruler, one who has actually succeeded in conquering and reshaping the world in his twisted image, he benefits from being a protagonist from a predecessor game. The designers of this experience, well, they knew Kain well. They make no secret about his core sense of superiority and the iron will he has combined with his absolute selfishness. And though this game was developed largely by a new production studio, Crystal Dynamics, enough designers who had worked on the original game were carried over to keep the essence of the world of Nosgoth alive. Can there be any better villain than one the player has already formed an emotional bond with, but who they already knew was twisted and corrupt from the start? And even players who picked up Soul Reaver who had never experienced Blood Omen, which actually included me back in the Millennium, could sense how well developed and confidently relayed this complex story was. The tapestry of Nosgoth was rich with layers upon layers to explore. It opens as clear and sophisticated as it means to go on. The opening monologue introducing the central conflict starts with one simple phrase.
Kain is deified. The clans tell tales of him.
Players were presented with a desolate wasteland full of mystery and gothic beauty. The technology of the console was not powerful enough to really animate this world, but given the game released before the Millennium, it is a technical marvel. Every area has an ethereal beauty. Though the models are simplistic, they are excellently designed to be both monstrous and splendid. It's all accompanied by a haunting soundtrack produced by industrial electronica composer Kurt Harland. The main protagonists of Raziel and Kain are joined by a new creation, the Elder God, with some subtle hints of an eldritch tentacle Cthulhu-style horror.
I would choose oblivion over this existence.
The choice is not yours.
And the Elder God is responsible for resurrecting Raziel from an eternity of torment, and he guides him on this quest for vengeance. First, Raziel must hunt down 4 of his original 5 vampiric brothers, each of whom have mutated into monsters in his absence, before he can then take on the Master himself. With each enemy he defeats, Raziel will gain new supernatural powers, the ability to phase through barriers, to scale walls, to swim through water. The game borrows Metroidvania elements, as the world opens up into a complex, interconnected maze. Each of these areas has their own distinctive features and challenges, and though some are longer than others, all have something new to offer. One of the later levels promises a grand fortress that is found to be abandoned, and what you had assumed to be a large fortress to fight your way through essentially becomes one puzzle, as the entire area is forcing the player to prepare a trap within which they can lure their otherwise invincible adversary. The intelligent design shines through, but it also brings with it occasional random difficulty spikes, with bizarre puzzles that appear incomprehensible until the answer is revealed. This is perhaps just another sign that the game is fundamentally incomplete. The game designers had prepared several additional areas, more bosses and extra story beats, an entire portion of the campaign that they had to excise to meet their deadlines. One of the vampire brothers who originally betrayed Raziel and cast him into the abyss at the start of the game is left forgotten, never mentioned after the campaign begins. There's a whole side area, a hidden human city where refugee survivors from the vampiric carnage that have wreaked the world are hiding out within a sealed fortress. It's an empty area with almost no content. The game ends on a completely unsatisfactory cliffhanger. Although the game was significantly delayed long after its original planned release date, Soul Reaver had a lot of cut content and it shows. However, ignoring the cliffhanger ending, it feels churlish to accuse the game of being completely unfinished. What is here is so beautifully managed and competently put together. It shows its age now, as a propensity for block pushing puzzles and a fairly shallow combat system, both of which are 3D platforming hallmarks. But the design is excellent. The phase shifting concept of moving between the material and the spectral worlds is a great idea. The game is butter smooth with clean, satisfying movement and no interruptions for loading of any sort at all. Most loading is hidden behind momentary pauses as he pushes open and then swaggers confidently through doorways. The transition feels almost invisible. In modern games, open worlds are commonplace, but this game really was the pioneer in the shift towards normalising the concept. The graphics are showing their age now. The thin polygonal walls that make up the environment don't entirely fit into each other, so there are little gaps in the world that you can see through. You can actually see the hardware grinding to a halt trying to pull it all together. But Soul Reaver makes a blessing of this warped perspective. The environments are deliberately pale and bland, with an ethereal quality that evokes the author's intent. Raziel is perfectly designed to fit the hardware limitations. He wears a scarf to cover his ruined lower face, so all the game has to render is a shockingly 1990s haircut and 2 burning pale eyes. Only Kain stands out as a particularly weak link. However, long before we see him in the game engine, we're treated to a fully rendered CGI cutscene that shows both him and the original majestic pre-Abyss Raziel as clearly as possible. For its time, this cutscene showed magnificent artistry. But it all comes back to the writing and the vocal performance of the main characters. The trifecta of Michael Bell, Tony Jay and Simon Templeman performing a script written by Amy Hennig, who would then go on to create the Nathan Drake and the 3 first Uncharted games, is delicious. The game has a gothic vibe but a Shakespearean script. Melchiah, the first of Raziel's brothers to face the sword, has de-evolved over the millennia into a shambling monstrosity, and he introduces himself with the following conversation.
Do you not recognize me, brother? Am I so changed?
Melchiah?
Yes, brother. You should have stayed where the Master sent you, Raziel. You will find Nosgoth less pleasant than you remember.
What has become of my clan? Answer me, little brother, or I will beat an answer from your horrid lips.
Everyone is afraid, sibling. You awake to a world of fear. These times of change are so unsettling. Do you think I feel no revulsion for this form? Do you believe for a moment that our Lord would risk his empire upon an upstart inheritance?
Killing this abominable creature, ostensibly one of the great rulers of this broken world, feels more like putting down a sick and terrible creature rather than the cathartic revenge that the game's premise originally indicated. There's a strong marriage of gameplay and storytelling that pulls everything together, with each element working in tandem to create an experience that emphatically becomes more than the sum of its parts. Nosgoth is a sick and broken world, a place beyond saving, and everyone knows it. Even Kain himself shows little interest in stopping your rampage, and actually pushes you along to complete your quest. He warns your brothers that Raziel is coming to get them, and then at the end he chides the player for not getting their task done quicker.
I must say I'm disappointed in your progress. I imagined you'd be here sooner. Tell me, did it trouble you to murder your brothers?
This game is worth it for the story, although the gameplay has aged. Some issues become apparent beyond the infuriating puzzle designs. At the start of the game, Raziel struggles to maintain a corporeal form, and therefore must feed on souls to remain in the real world. So this means at first the combat is quite fun. You can swipe or pick up staves or other weapons with ease, and the mechanics for killing vampires is well explained. Just attacking them will not do. To deliver a killing blow, either impaling them, using water, harsh sunlight or fire is required, and only then can Raziel feed to sustain his body. If you die in the material realm, you're forced back to the spectral world. If you die in the spectral world, the Elder God will reanimate you in the underworld. All of these elements are a cohesive combination, where the gameplay is designed around the narrative. However, after receiving the Soul Reaver, his main weapon, Raziel can sustain his material form indefinitely, as long as you maintain full health. So unless you are forced into it, combat then becomes a distraction.
There's a very limited selection of enemies, none of whom provide a real challenge unless they gang up on you in a tight space. By the end, after learning the ability to force push projectiles, I'd just push enemies away from me and run past to avoid the hassle. This is not a critical problem of game design. All of the game systems are working as they're meant to, but it is an example of a game which needed an extra level of polish to complete. After a certain point in the game, fighting simply becomes unnecessary, and the game devolves into a succession of block puzzles, corridor sequences and cutscenes. But Raziel's quest for revenge is a brilliant slice of early game storytelling. All of the story is delivered through cutscenes, pauses that regularly interrupt and break apart the gameplay segments. But the game's concept and story are rarely meshed so well. None of Raziel's gameplay mechanics are forced. They are a natural and organic result of his vampire heritage, and they form an integral moment of the story. The world inherited from the original Blood Omen game is rich with history and intrigue, and the plights of Ariel, a disembodied spirit haunting the central hub, and Mobius, the time-streaming oracle who foresaw Kain's great betrayal, provide hints at an epic meta-narrative. One can only wish that the team had been able to complete the story they'd originally wanted to tell, but that would sadly have to wait until the sequels. If you can't play Soul Reaver itself, then I would urge you to find a video and learn more about Raziel and Kain, one of gaming's greatest rivalries. The game was ahead of its time in so many ways, and it remains beloved now for a reason.